Hey, welcome to the Collective Church Online Experience. Glad that you are back and hanging out with us and being a part. And so before we get into it, I just want to tell you a movie quote and see if you know what it is. Okay, so don't Google this, don't cheat, don't look it up. But the quote is this: "This is what you've trained for. Now suck it up." Okay, now the quote: "This is what you've trained for. Now suck it up." Now again, no Googling. I'd love to know kind of like who you think this is, or sorry, what movie it is from. I'm gonna give you a few seconds just to kind of guess, and then I'm going to tell you who it is. We're just gonna give a few seconds for people to maybe chime in on the chat and let me know if you know this movie. A hint is it's from 1998. It is a movie starring Ben Affleck. It is a movie about a team of deep sea drilling experts who go to an asteroid to help save the planet Earth. So the movie is Armageddon. And this is what a pilot of one of the ships turns around when everybody's freaking out, when they're trying to land on the asteroid. He turns around and says, "This is what you've trained for, now suck it up." So that's my favorite movie quote. What are your favorite movie quotes? Like, I'd love to just kind of know what your favorite movie quotes are. And if you could put the quote and then the movie. Now, I got to tell you, let's not cast judgment on any of the movies that are chosen, are picked. We all have our favorite types of movies. Then we all have our movies that we literally can't stand. Mine is The Notebook. I literally have a hard time with Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams because of that movie, and because they basically turn into birds at the very end. So it was really kind of weird. But what are your favorite movie quotes and what movie it's from? So hopefully you're putting those on there, and we can kind of tell a little bit about you. Is it a romantic comedy? Is it a comedy? Is it a thriller? Is it a horror movie? Is it a disaster flick like Armageddon? That is my favorite movie quote. But when you think about it, there are reasons that quotes stand out. If you think about famous historical quotes, if you think about famous quotes from the movies we've talked about, if we think about political quotes, if we think about some of the quotes from speeches that we have seen or that we have heard of, like, there are reasons why quotes stick in our brain. It's because it means something to us, but there's also a reason that quotes stick in a historical context. And that is because they have meant something. Like, they have found recognition, they have found favor, they have found something that has stuck not just in one or two people, but in a society, in a culture. And so as we look at your movie quotes, we see evidence of that, like what it has meant to you. Now, like, for some of you may go, "Chuck, I don't have much of a church background, or I don't really know a lot of Bible stuff," and that's fine. But you may have heard some things. You may have heard some things growing up, just watching stuff or hearing from stuff. And so when you think about famous quotes or famous statements or famous phrases from the Bible, I'd love to know what are some famous phrases or quotes that you remember from the Bible. So already it's a lot of interactive stuff this morning. What was my favorite quote from? What are your favorite movie quotes? And now I'm asking, like, what is your favorite, or not even favorite, just what are some Bible statements, Bible quotes that are kind of famous? And by famous, I mean they're kind of well known. Now, again, if you didn't grow up in church, don't worry about it. You might be spared from some of these things and not know them, but just love to know what some of those are. Now, at the time of doing this, I don't have a clue if any of you said this one phrase that I want to talk about, and it is this phrase: "For such a time as this." So when you hear that phrase, some of you may be aware of where it comes from. Some of you may not. Some of you may be like, "Oh, I've always heard that, like, for such a time as this." And like, well, what does that mean? And in most translations, because when you look at different translations and things like that, often it can change up a little bit. But for this, most major translations, "for such a time as this," is translated the same way: "for such a time as this." And where it comes from is out of the story of Esther in the Old Testament. And it was said by a guy named Mordecai. Now, Mordecai was a Jew. So his cousin is Esther. Okay, so his uncle's daughter was Esther. Esther was orphaned And Mordecai basically took her in. So instead of being more like a cousin, he was more like a father. And so Mordecai was a Jew, Esther was a Jew. Look, this story starts out where someone that you may not have heard of, her name is, the best way I know how to pronounce it is Vashti, Vashti. She was the queen, okay? So you had the, just went out of frame, but you have the king. Now, I don't really know how to say this one name, but I believe it's King Ahasuerus, okay? So his queen was Vashti. So Vashti, they're having the king is having a party, and there's all this kind of stuff going on, and kind of like revelry, and people were drinking way too much. The king calls for Vashti, and Vashti says no. Now, most of you guys are aware that during this time, if you say no to the king, not only is it bad, but as the wife, and in this culture, the way that wives were kind of like viewed as women, and as kind of like even kind of like this property. This feast had gone on, and then the king does this. Okay, for the king had I'm sorry, I lost my place. Okay, so anyway, sorry. So Queen Vashti refused. So the seventh day of this party that's going on, and the king drinking a ton. It literally says in my translation, merry with wine. So having a good time. He commanded some people to go get him his wife. To bring, verse 11 literally says, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. So basically, I'm about to show off my wife. I just went and called for her, and then this is hilarious to me. Verse 12 says, but Queen Vashti refused to come to the king's command, delivered by the eunuchs, by the servants that King Ahasuerus had sent to go get his wife. And at this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. So here is this picture of what is setting up, what is about to happen in Esther. And the reason that Esther is even in a place of favor, and even in a place of influence, and kind of in a place to have some power in this moment. Vashti was like, I'm not going to come and just be your little token and come be this little trinket at the seventh day of this festival. I'm not coming. Well, the king gets mad. Basically, here's what happens. He basically fires Vashti from being a queen. Okay, you're no longer the queen, really. And so he basically puts on this kind of like a beauty pageant, and kind of like this competition of finding someone new. Long story short, Esther becomes that person. Like she kind of makes it to the, she's in all the rounds, and she makes it, and she wins, and she gets the king's favor, and she becomes like, basically she's chosen to be queen. At the beginning of chapter 2, verse 1, it says, after these things, so after this whole process, Queen Vashti's refusal and the royal order that went out for all the women to come and to be a part, then you get to chapter 2, verse 1, and it says this: after these things, so after all that had happened to get to this place, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, had kind of calmed down a little bit, like he settled down a little bit, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of the kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the capital, under custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the woman. Okay, so this does not sound like a great deal, but Esther becomes one of these people that is chosen to go through this process, and then she gets chosen. Okay, like she is going to be the one that is going to be the next queen. In verse 16 of chapter 2, it says this: and when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in the sight more than all the virgins. So that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. So there's this big party again, okay? where now, Vashti, you're no longer queen. Esther, you're in. You won the competition. It literally sounds a little bit like it was the first bachelor or bachelorette where this person is being chosen to go on. Now, remember, Mordecai was already kind of like, Mordecai was around, and Mordecai was a part of what is happening in this time. He is telling Esther, don't let anybody know that you're a Jew. Don't tell anybody that you are you're Jewish. Like, that is just something we need to keep secret. Well, at this time, Mordecai overhears these two people that worked for the king. Basically, they got really ticked at the king, and he's like, look, and those two people were plotting to kill the king. So here's what Mordecai does. Mordecai gets this, and he's like, I'm going to take this information, and he takes it to Esther, okay? And the Esther takes it to the king and says that he tells the king in the name of Mordecai, okay? And when they investigated it, they found out that it was true, and those two dudes that tried to kill the king were hung, okay? Now, this dude named Haman, and I remember growing up that this guy named Haman, it was in a Bible story that my parents would read to me at night, and I just remember hating Haman, and I just remember that I always wanted to, he was always like this worst villain in the Bible to me. And so Haman begins to kind of realize that he wants people to bow down to him, that he wants people to kind of give favor toward him, and he finds out Mordecai will not bow down to him. Okay, Mordecai was like, I'm not going to do this. He even says in verse 3 that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage or honor, a big word for honor, to him. And Haman was filled with fury, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So, as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom. So, Haman gets disrespected by Mordecai, and Mordecai's like, I'm taking it against you. I'm taking out all your people. Okay, so I'm going to take out all the Jews in the land. So, as you begin to see this, you begin to see this idea that Haman goes to the king and kind of tricks him into this decree that he puts his signet ring on, basically saying, whoever these people are that are disrespecting me, where Haman was kind of painting this picture that it was this entire people group that was disrespecting without really naming it. He tricks the king basically into being like, go after that. We will not allow that to occur and allow that to happen. Okay. Now, what begins to occur now as you look at Esther chapter 4, which is where we're going to kind of hang out, because we know that later, not only does Esther, Esther is the queen and all that kind of stuff. She's the queen now. So Mordecai hears about this whole plot. He tears his clothes. He does all the kind of mourning things that happens. Esther hears about it, tries to send people to give him clothes. Mordecai's like, I'm not doing it. There's no way that I'm going to do it. Okay? Now, we get to Esther 4. All right? And here's what begins to happen. Let's start in verse 11. Okay? So Esther is speaking to one of the workers and says, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man, because here's what Mordecai was like, you need to go to the king and tell him what's happening. You need to go to the king, and we need to work together to save the Jewish people. And Esther, knowing that the queen could not just go in, no one could go into the king's court without being invited in. But Esther knew that she is a woman, even though she was queen, she could not do that. So all the king's servants, this is Esther, and the people of the king's province know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. So Mordecai is like, Esther, we got work that we got to do. Esther's like, look, that is certain death. There's no way that I could do that. So the people that Esther had sent kind of went back and heard this and said this to Mordecai. And then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. So all of a sudden, you've got these people going back and forth between Esther and Mordecai. It's like walking text messages that are going back and forth. Mordecai says this to Esther through the people. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, saying this. Look, somewhere someone's going to step up, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom, and here's that phrase, for such a time as this. So this phrase is from this place of Mordecai saying, you got to do this to save the Jews. Esther's like, there's no way. I know what's going to happen when it happens. Like it's certain death. Mordecai sends back, look, you have been positioned in place. And then there's this famous phrase, for such a time as this. Mordecai as the cousin, as the guardian, as the adopted father, the person that had raised Esther after she had been orphaned when her mom and dad dies. Vashti starts all of this kind of with the fact that she refused to be the little play toy for the king. Mordecai hears what is, Mordecai refuses to bow down and pay honor to Haman. Haman gets really ticked. Haman decides that he's going to trick the king into killing all the Jews. Mordecai hears about this. He mourns. Esther tries to help him by sending clothes and things like that. And Mordecai's like, you need to step up and do this for the king. Esther's like, I can't do it. It's certain death. And Mordecai says, look, the second request, that you're here for a reason. You've been positioned and placed here for a reason. You are here for such a time as this. So Esther decides to go to the king. Now, the way that this builds out is Esther is like super strategic, and she plays the long game. It's this invitation to a banquet, and to ask this question, and the king's like, you can have everything up to half the kingdom, and like she invites them to another thing, and he says it again, like you can have up to half of my kingdom. Well, Haman at this time is completely planning to kill Mordecai, to hang him. He builds a gallows. He builds this thing that he's going to hang him on because he's like, I'm going to get rid of this dude. Well, to kind of wrap it all up, we find out because Esther tricks Haman into being in a situation where Esther is able to out Haman to the king. That Haman has tricked the king into trying to get rid of the Jews, and the deception and all that has happened. Well, anyway, instead of Mordecai being hung on the gallows, Haman is hung on the gallows. So now that you get to this place where Esther has decided to go to the king, and that she did all this kind of stuff, and the people are saved. So what does this story do to the original audience? Well, the original audience would know that the Jewish people were saved because of Esther's courage and Esther's bravery. And just Esther doing something that, one, probably people wouldn't have expected her to do. There was no cultural precedent for her to do that, except for the fact that people have died. She even says it. People have died doing this. Mordecai showed bravery and courage. Esther shows bravery and courage. And then and basically Mordecai's like, look, if you keep silent, all our people are gone. All our people are dead. What if? He even says, and who knows? Basically, you've been positioned in place for such a time as this. A moment or a moment like this, when we are positioned in place to courageously do something that works alongside what God is doing. Think about that for a second. That what if, or what, like he said, and who knows, if we are positioned in place to courageously do something that is working alongside what God is already doing. You look and see what happened. It helped save the Jews. Even though Haman had this plan, Mordecai knew it. Mordecai convinced Mordecai convinced Esther. Esther risked talking to the king, and then the king recognized what was right. Even though Esther kind of went through this crazy long process, he recognized what was right. So, what does this say to the people, the audience then? They were like, look at what Queen Esther did for the Jewish people. Look at the courage. Look at what the Jewish people went on to, like who we were able to see come later, who is a Jew. Who are we able to see come about because the people of God were protected? And then we ask the question, so what does the story say to us? First off, you never really know how a series of events is going to be affecting the future, if you think about it. Like, you've ever heard about the butterfly effect, where it's like if a butterfly flaps its wings in the forest, how does that build and affect, and does that affect like wind somewhere else? And it's kind of, there's a crazy movie with Ashton Kutcher called The Butterfly Effect. I've never seen it, but it seems kind of interesting. But you never know how a series of obedient events is going to affect you and your future. Esther, this series of obedient events, and really just this one big event where she was like, I'm going to the king and I'm going to work and get creative and courageously work to see my people saved. God positions and places for a reason. And when we have courage and wisdom to be obedient to that, we're able to look and see that we are a part of the story. We're able to look and see how God has positioned and placed us to be able to move forward courageously and to move forward with wisdom, to see what he is doing and to be obedient at this step, and then to continue to move forward and be obedient. Now, here's the deal. None of us are kings and queens, and none of us are facing, most likely we're not facing any kind of dangerous event if we do something. But again, to the original audience, we see this incredible story of how the Jewish people were spared because of Esther's bravery, her courage, her wisdom, and what the people of God were able to, like you see the story of the people of God moving forward. How do we move forward like Esther? How do we move forward in a way that's like we realize where we are being positioned in place? Because again, we're not Queen Esther. We are not involved in a physical kingdom. And there's most likely not a Haman coming after us and the people that are around us. But what it does show is this, and what we are able to learn is this, is one, where are we positioned in place to courageously move forward in obedience and with wisdom and courage to walk alongside what God is already doing? So let me say it again. Where are we positioned in place to move forward in obedience with courage and wisdom to walk out what God is already doing or what he wants to start doing? How do we move forward like Esther? The first thing is you got to realize where you're positioned in place. And then you've got to look and you've got to evaluate and you've got to kind of look at, once you kind of realize where are you positioned in place, is God already doing something that's going to take courage and wisdom that I need to walk forward in obedience? Where you go, I'm not exactly sure how this series of events is going to work out itself out in the future, but I know God has positioned and placed me, and I know I'm at a place where I can move forward with courage and wisdom to continue to walk out what God is already doing or what he wants to do. Taking the next right step. Doing something courageous, doing something wise is how we're able to move forward like Esther. Now, this story is 10 chapters long in the book of Esther, and I did not get to every single detail. But what I want us to do as we set up this group chat time is for us to begin thinking. And who knows, like in Esther 4:14, and who knows, what if you've come here? What if you're positioned in place for such a time as this? Where's that position and placement? And what is for such a time as this mean? What courageously and with wisdom do you need to move forward in to walk alongside what God is already doing or what he wants to do? I think it applies to us individually. I think it applies to our small groups that are part of the collective. I think it applies to who we are as the collective as a whole, and it applies to our families. Where are we positioned in place to courageously and with wisdom walk forward in obedience, to walk alongside what God is already doing or what he wants to do? So that's what kind of the mindset and the thoughts as we go into this group time and as we look at these questions. Have an incredible day. Look, February 20th is the next gathering. And listen, I would love for you to be there. I'm excited about the things that we're doing with the Lord's Supper. I'm excited about how we're kind of looking at all the why we and looking more at who we are and why we do what we do. So love for you to be a part of the chat today. Cannot wait to see you at the gathering on February 20th. Have an incredible day, and we will see you next Sunday.
You say just come to you.